Well, good evening, everybody, again for another of our winter-based TFA virtual seminars. We're on a pretty tight time frame tonight, so I'll just briefly introduce our three speakers and then we'll get cracking. Once again, we're joined by Linda Davey, who is now a familiar figure on these, which is great. Linda, welcome. Again, as you'll know, she's from Marshall Wooldridge Insurance Brokers, and they're part of the GRP group, who are our insurance affiliate with the TFA. Tonight, she's going to particularly cover the topic of environmental insurance, covering things like the cost of restoring damage caused by environmental accidents, such as pollution of land, water, air, and biodiversity damage. There've been a few quite high-profile cases over the last year or two, so it'll be interesting to learn from Linda about that. Second up, as I mentioned earlier, we have Caroline Drummond. As I say, many of you will know Caroline, I'm sure, and her work has been dedicated to securing more sustainable farming practices and addressing climate change through integrated farm management for many, many years. And I'm sure some of us have, to a greater or lesser extent at some point, got involved with integrated farm management, and I think now it really is coming to the fore. And also, as part of the LEAF role, trying to build a better connection with the public, building public trust, understanding of farming, food, health, and the environment. And I think this is something that we really all have to continue to work more and more and more about. It's really important that the public understand the role that we as farmers play, and I think LEAF have over the years done such a good a role with that, and continue to do so. So it'll be good to hear from Caroline, and as I say, very much focused on nature-based farming techniques and how they can be used positively on the farm. We're also, I'm really pleased to say, we're joined tonight by Baroness Kate Rock. Again, some of you may be familiar with Baroness Rock. She's a massive supporter of the TFA within the House of Lords, and is a tenant farmer herself down in Dorset. I was going to say Wiltshire there, but that feels like saying Lincolnshire when you meant Yorkshire. So I don't know that area, but I'm feeling that's bad. So I'm saying Dorset here, which I hope is right. Baroness Rock is going to talk a little bit about the Tenancy Working Group, which has just very recently been set up. I think she's been very influential in getting this together. It's a really massive step, we feel, in terms of how tenants will be able to engage with the new schemes going forward. So I think that's a really positive step in the environment that we're dealing with at the moment. So welcome to Baroness Rock, who will also be speaking. And just a very quick plug, the next one of these webinars, which will be on the 6th of April, will be entirely focused on the Tenants Working Group and be held as a kind of a meeting rather than as a webinar. So keep an eye out for that. So as I say, we've got quite a lot to get through tonight. I'm conscious of trying to keep to time. I think I'm probably already over it. So we'll get cracking, and I'll pass over to, first of all, to Linda. So welcome, Linda. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mark, and good evening, everybody. Just like to talk a little bit about environmental insurance, or as it's called in the trade, environmental impairment liability. That's changed a lot over the years. Back in the day, the pollution cover, as it was called then, really only related to sudden and unforeseen incidents, not gradual seepages, and it also only paid for third-party damage. So if you just have a pollution incident on your own land back in the day, you wouldn't have any cover under your insurance policy for any remedial measures. But over the years, the cover has changed. I think insurance companies have accepted the need, following legislation such as the environmental damage regulations in 2009, they accepted the need to change the insurance cover So that has developed into the environmental impairment liability, which extends far further than just pollution. And it covers, for example, your own land pollution. If you have a spillage on your own land, your policy should operate to reinstate your property to how it was originally. It can cover long-term problems, so gradual seepage, and it also extends to any sort of environmental impairment, such as air, water, biodiversity damage. So that it's a massive improvement on how it was. So the problem is that as far as the law is concerned, at the minute, the polluter pays. Excuse me, ever since COVID, my voice has got very crackly. Anyway, so the polluter pays, and that means that even if the incident isn't necessarily your fault, or you think you could attribute some of the blame to somebody else, the burden of proof is on the polluter. So you get lumbered with all the costs initially. Whether you ever manage to claim any of those costs back is another issue. But in the first instance, the polluter will be responsible for the damage. So the policy will cover clean-up costs and investigation costs. And we probably all know that the Environment Agency can charge £100, £150 an hour plus VAT for investigation works. It covers damages from impacted third parties, the cost of defending a claim, and claims arising from the environmental impairment. So that should be your cover under any of your farm insurance policies, no matter who you're with, that should be your cover. There are exclusions that I just must warn you about, because depending on what you do, you might find you are in trouble with your cover. So please speak to your insurance provider if you have any doubt. But for example, if you do agricultural contracting, you may find that your pollution cover or environmental cover is not operative unless you take out some more specific top-up insurance. The size of the tank might be an issue in some insurance policies, so tanks over a certain size might not be covered if they leak. Whether you're operating legally, for example, is a huge issue amongst all the environmental cover. So just be careful about your tanks, whether they comply with the law on being, whether they need to be bunded, then they should be bunded. And also if you've adapted, altered or moved your tank and it didn't need to be bunded at the time, if you've altered or moved it, you'll find that it does need to be bunded. And you could be in trouble again if you've done that, and you expect your insurance policy to respond. If there's a leakage, you might find there isn't going to be a response. Other issues are if you have any sort of rented out premises. So, for example, if you have some units on your land that you let out to subcontractors or subtenants doing different kinds of operations, you might find that there's no cover either for any of their activities. So depending on what they do, just be careful that your environmental cover is going to pick up the issue if they cause a problem. You as a sort of tenant might be responsible, they might be responsible. The trouble is everybody gets a little bit of mud thrown at them in those circumstances, and I guess they'll see what sticks. Your fines are not going to be covered by insurance. Sorry about that, but any criminal fines that you incur for pollution or environmental damage is not going to be covered by your insurance. So just be aware of that, because there's some hefty fines being levied at the minute. If you're lucky enough just to have a small pollution incident, so for example, a burst, diesel tank, the average cost of putting that right in terms of removing the contaminated soil, reinstating Environment Agency costs, that sort of thing, is around about, on average, £20,000. So just make sure that your tank does comply, or else if you do have an incident like that, you can be looking at £20,000 worth of costs that you might not have to incur if you make sure you're compliant. And that, the only other thing to mention is underground tanks. Just be careful if you've got underground tanks. And when they say underground, they mean more than 10% of your tanks being underground, with the exception of slurry stores. If you've got underground reservoirs or tanks, then again, look at your policy wording. You could be in trouble if one of those leaks. You may not find your policy responding to that. But I think that bearing in mind the new rural payment system is going to be tailored much more towards the environment, it might be that insurance companies have to, again, look at their cover and decide whether it's going to be adequate going forwards for any new rural payments that are made. So, you don't want to lose your rural payment if you don't comply, but also you've got to think about the insurance side of it. So I hope that just gives you a very brief outline of environmental impairment cover. I know it's not the most gripping of topics, but it can be a very expensive topic if you get it wrong.
Thank you very much, Linda. I think that last sentiment is often the case, isn't it, with insurance issues, is if you get it wrong, it can be very expensive, but definitely food for thought on certain things, particularly the point about if we are going to get paid more for environmental actions, maybe we need to be aware of what we're covered for if it goes slightly wrong. So, as I said earlier, if anybody has any questions for any of the speakers tonight, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll move on to Caroline now, who's going to talk to us about nature-based farming and the techniques and how they can be used positively on a farm going forward. So, welcome, Caroline, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me. And yes, I've been running Leaf now for over 30 years. I think I've probably known you, Mark, during all of that time as well. But I have to say, when it comes to nature, the more I learn, the more I realise I just don't know. And I think this is one of the complexities of nature and its engagement as a biological sort of integration within our chemical and physical aspects of our farming as well. So I'm just going to try and do a little bit of an insight of some of the work we're doing. In fact, Mark's involved in one of the particular projects as well, and why actually, nature is fundamentally important. So you can see here from this tidal wave of disasters that face us all the time, that it is growing. And COVID, probably could put Brexit slightly before there as well, it all had a huge impact. But now increasingly climate change is having an impact, whether it be through, I would have said 5 years ago, farmers don't really deal in climate, they deal in weather. Well, now actually more and more as a farming industry, we are dealing in climate face to face, whether it be extreme droughts, rainfalls, wind, wildfire, etc. These challenges of climate change actually have a major impact. And with that come a host of other additional challenges, some which may end up being to our favour here in the UK and in England and Wales in particular, around the very fact that there's an opportunity for potentially growing new crops, but there will be new pests and diseases. And when you look at some of the challenges around that, how do we combat that? And I was taken, sort of down a very interesting avenue the other day when we were talking about pests and diseases, and there'd been a bit of a challenge around a food safety issue. And the issue couldn't be identified clearly, and it was because what they actually eventually found was a disease, or it was a pest rather, that they had never identified before, which had serious consequences for food safety. So we may think, oh, yay, we've got food safety sorted, but actually there will be additional challenges. And of course, biodiversity is part of the solution in this space. Everything we do, whether it's the water we drink, the air we breathe, the food we eat, they are all dependent, obviously, on the natural world. They keep our reservoirs clean, the food and fields growing, and that biodiversity, the biological integrated pest management type approaches, are all being underpinned by wildlife and biodiversity that surrounds us. And if we didn't have them, then actually we wouldn't have that, what was to me as a child being brought up, the original food web, where actually if you start taking things out of that natural resource, you actually eventually collapse it. And when you look at some of the statistics, since 1970, over 40 million birds there's less than 40 million birds there were in the sky at the time. And when you start looking at comparing us to other G7 countries, although I would love to say we're doing some fantastic things, we're not doing as well as others. And I think that's because, we perhaps don't have some of the very rich and diverse nature habitats, and we're much more of a land sharing country than perhaps a land sparing country. So in America, you'll have vast tracts of areas that just really aren't touched, as an example, or in Transylvania or places like that. Next slide, please. So when you start looking at nature sort of based solutions, one of the things that we've been doing is working with the IUCN over the last 3 years. They're the people that were behind COP26, and in fact all the other COPs that go on. And COP15, I don't know if you all know, Mark, do you know all about COP15?
Well, I do, Caroline, because my daughter's working in that department.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, well, that's
well, when I say I know all about it, clearly I don't know all about it, but I'm aware of it. Perhaps it's a better description.
Good. Well, COP15 is obviously the biological diversity, enhancing biological diversity, whereas the other COPs have been very much geared towards combating climate change. All really important. But the IUCN have been looking very much at this whole area of nature-based, nature-derived and nature-inspired in understanding where nature integrates with what we do. And we're very proud as an organisation in that we've been awarded the standard, the IUCN standard, to demonstrate that we follow their approach for nature-based solutions. So that's quite an honour. We're one of the very first non-state agents, which means basically we're not government, to get that. And it's based around all the work we do with LEAF, not just the demonstration farms. It's the broader aspects, the beyond certification, not just LEAF mark, sorry, that is so important. But when you start looking at nature-based solutions, it's worth thinking, what do I do on my farm around that? And it's creating functioning ecosystems as an infrastructure to provide the natural services that obviously benefit society, environment, but benefit you in making your soil work for you. In terms of, we all know that little story, a teaspoon of soil has more protozoa and bacteria and fungal forms just in a teaspoon than there ever have been people alive on this planet. So I think, that we forget just how alive the soil is under our feet, and keeping that really going so that we can fix more carbon, so that we can really ensure that we have healthier root systems, more retentive soil, and in terms of water holding capacity and things like that, really critical. Then there's the nature-derived ones, those that we think, yeah, that's a pretty, Leonardo da Vinci was first class at this, the sort of the wind, the wave, the solar energy, where we actually look to nature to support and to come up with some ideas. And they're not necessarily based on the functioning ecosystems, but they're working very hard alongside nature. And then the nature inspired. This is the biomimicry area. I love this. So this will be like your little gecko. He's got thousands of filaments on his little fingertips, which is just a bit like Spider-Man walking up walls and things like that. Or it may be that sort of other areas of mimicry in terms of looking how ants develop things, particularly through better architecture. So that's great, nature-based, nature-derived, nature-inspired. But in addition to that, the next slide, please, Julia. Thank you. We also need technology-based solutions to go alongside that. When you start thinking, yeah, nature is probably the biggest proven technology to address climate change, we often kind of forget that. And we look to technology and innovation as sort of sparkly silver stuff, whether it be drones or bits on the tractor or hydrogen tractors or vertical farming. But actually, it's our capability to manipulate, work, exploit, but hopefully more than anything, really try and understand how we can make sure that our farming systems is productive, resilient, alongside obviously very strong biodiversity and resilience. You'll see on the right hand side a little picture of a jellyfish there, because when you start looking at what is the most energy efficient animal in the whole of the world, it's the jellyfish. So what is it that we can learn from that to actually be much more acutely, I haven't quite thought of one relating to farming yet, but we'll get there. And then you start looking at the genetics and the capability we have with things like not only the gene editing, nicely controversial, but at the same time, a great opportunity for us to understand better how we're going to combat some of the future diseases. But in addition to that, also looking at things like our knowledge around genetics is just becoming at a different level. So introducing epigenetics. So what we thought was kind of like, this is your fairly standard package of genetics. Actually, there are a lot of environmental impacts that will change the properties of those genetic profiles to work. And it's a bit like using a dimmer switch in a room, where actually you can turn the light on or off. Likewise, there are certain interactions within some of the genetics that we have in our plants and our livestock that actually, if you haven't got the environment right, you won't get the best functioning genetics. So there's some, all angles of genetics that are very critical. The next slide, please. And for me, nature's, as a child, I'm not originally from farming. My father was a diver, so I spent most of my life in or under or on the water. But, nature's always been a very key part. And, when you start looking at, next slide, please, the sort of the connectivity that's going to be so important. It's that recognizing across landscapes, how do we make our environment thrive? This is the view from where we live. We farm down in Cornwall, and it's just, there is such an opportunity, and I'm sure many of you will be involved in some of the I hope the opportunity of trying to get more involved in some of the cluster groups and development in that area. So when you start, next slide please, looking at what the challenges are, there are sort of, you can take this two ways, goodness me, wake me up when they've made a decision, or actually, it's really important to work as a bottom-up approach. And for us, that's practical. My favorite saying is, when all's said and done, there's a lot more said than done. And boy, is that true. And so as an organization, we are very much a can-do one. And the next slide, please. And we've been going, as I said, about, 30 years, but our mission hasn't really changed during that time. And for us, integrated farm management, that sort of regenerative, call it what you'd like to, vibrant nature-based solutions, agroecological, is absolutely core to our approach. And it's climate positive action that will support health, diversity and enrichment. Now, I think those three words are going to be increasingly important: healthy soils, healthy livestock, healthy people. The diversity around the diversity of our crops, our livestock, our biodiversity, and indeed recognizing more the richness and diversity of the cultures that we have here in the UK, that we are not taking the opportunity to really feed and get involved in, and of course, enriching minds and enriching all our environment and our capability in our land. Next slide, please. So in terms of delivering, this is for those of you who've not kind of come across integrated farm management. As farmers, you're the ultimate juggler, 9 balls at any one time. It is not about single issues. It's about organization and planning, soil management, crop health, energy efficiency, animal husbandry, pollution control, water management, landscape and nature conservation, engaging society. And all of those things work at different sort of rates and different priorities at different times. Next slide, please. And over the next 10 years, we will now be starting to try and drive at scale and speed a real opportunity of delivering more climate positive solutions, creating beacons of excellence. So we're just starting now with some regen ag. We'll have some net carbon zero farms. We'll have some biodiversity farms. I'm very keen to have a few wicked farmers so that we can have some addressing some of the wicked problems that we face as an industry. You know, if we get rid of glyphosate, what's the challenge there, sort of thing, in terms of as we really try and inspire the use of min-till. So there's, you know, some good aspirations there. Next slide, please. And, you know, we do that through a range of ways. So there are pretty well 4 ways to change anything that you do. The first is kind of like make sure the system works. So for us, that's integrated farm management. The second is the show and tell. So we have a network of brilliant demonstration farms and innovation centres, and that will be added to by the beacons of excellence. But it is you as farmers who create the real solutions, sharing those ideas, saying, oh, that works, that wouldn't work, oh, I could adapt to that. That is so important. A farmer I met the other day, he said, gosh, if everybody took an acre out somewhere on their farm and actually started doing a little bit more experimentation, then, gosh, you know, that's thousands of acres collectively that we could really start trying to push some of the extremities. So they're really, really important. The third way of change is obviously the marketplace, and then if all else fails, legislate. But learning, sharing and driving change is absolutely critical. Next slide. And as part of that, we are involved in a project, the Linda Project, which is nature-based solutions for climate change. And really pleased that Mark is one of the 10 farmers that is taking part. So there's been some fantastic solutions. There's been AD plants with livestock. There's been protecting pollinators and things like that for supporting biodiversity. There's been min-till. There's been agroforestry, and then looking at alternative cover crops. But one of the common threads, actually, as a starting point, is that they have all done a carbon footprint, and we used Agriculc as a common band between them. And we've had some really great discussions. And one of those discussions that we had, I think it must have been just before Christmas, was one of the farmers, brilliant, he hadn't used any diesel. And all the other farmers were thinking, oh my goodness, have you got horses? How do you do this one then? Is it alternative fuels? And he said, oh no, I've got a contractor doing that. And so it's just recognizing that in terms of when it comes to scope 3, often the farmers are seen as the guys at the sort of the bottom of the pile. And we've got to be really clear that we know what are the parameters in all these measurements, which are becoming increasingly complex. Next slide, please. So part of also the solutions is, you know, it is driving those practical aspects. The Linda project has been really inspirational. The farmers are just brilliant, and they're coming up with some really great ideas that will drive change. We also, the marketplace. The market is a huge pull for change. And now a Leaf Mark, it's been going now over 22 years. All of Waitrose fresh produce is Leaf Mark certified. And indeed, Tesco announced that all their UK fresh produce will be Leaf Mark certified by the end of this year. And all of their global fresh produce will be certified by 2024. So it means that anything imported will be meeting the same requirements of the farmers that are meeting the standards of Leaf Mark. So it's a big change, and it's about scale. Next slide, please. And it's creating a positive action. There aren't always premiums, but 23% of farmers taking part in Leaf Mark do get that. But what it does do is create the market opportunities, demonstrate the good things that you're doing and capture that, and also demonstrate the sustainability credentials around it. Improve your farm management. Integrated farm management is about attention to detail, efficiencies, those marginal changes right through transformative changes. Next slide. And of course, you know, what's really important, if farmers are doing lots of brilliant things, it's really critical that we share. So over 2.75 million people over the last 16 years have gone out to farm on Open Farm Sunday. It's the best show and tell that there is in town. And golly, you know, over 300 farms open up, 10,000 people in the industry helping out each year. And obviously, you know, we did it online during COVID, but people just love it. Everybody wants to touch a farmer. You know, it is such a privilege that we have as an industry to really engage people in the story behind their food. Next slide, please. And I think, you know, even with the online aspects, you know, we had virtual tours that were international. We were able to make, you know, 1.7 million impressions over Facebook and Twitter, 40% new audiences, and very, very many of them are, so the split is around 50-50 urban, rural. And again, that's really important. So, you know, seeing what happens behind the public view has been really interesting. The milking parlour, international farms, a great addition to compare techniques, listening to people with passion. And we had bags of passion. Just finally, if you could have the next slide, please. Just very quickly to go through these. It is all about trust. And I think the new models working with government are going to be really important. It's actually a picture of my daughter. She's a stunt cheerleader at Bath University. And, you know, that is all about trust. And going forwards, the new model will be about government recognising things like earned recognition so that we can fully integrate into this area of where farmers have gone the extra mile for delivering a less risky business. You know, exactly what Linda was saying, you know, it's about managing risk at the end of the day. And if you can demonstrate you're doing your best to actually reduce that risk, then that's absolutely key. But it's a trust model that's going to be important. Next slide. We mustn't be blind to, obviously, there's not only the changing rhetoric around veganism, vegetarian, climatarian, flexitarian, obviously, you know, and we have a changing food culture. But actually, the real trick for us as an industry is to recognize that we grow health. There's a picture there of the vitamins. You know, that's what we should be replacing. You know, people shouldn't have to take vitamins. They can get that through their food. So our capability to produce healthy food and improve mental welfare through, obviously, our beautiful management of our landscape is key. Next slide. And technology is going to be a really important piece of this, whether it be, you know, us each having personal prescription. I always imagine I've got a little kind of, I guess, microchip here, which I would be able to scan in the supermarket, and it would tell me what I should and shouldn't eat. Or, oh goodness, Caroline, you know, you bought a bottle of wine 2 days ago, you know, or you know, you should be eating, you know, more healthily or more veg or eat some meat, you know. So all of those things are very important. So next slide, please. We need to recognize we can't beat Mother Nature. Next slide. And I think when you start, you know, realizing we cannot hide from the changes that are taking place, and that needs to be really proactive. Next. And all of that is going to be about transforming our farming systems. We want resilience, robustness. We need to be capable of mitigating and adapting to climate change. And then, you know, using nature, innovation and technology, data and information all hand in hand. And that's the ambition as a farming sector. We, you know, we've all inherently got to obviously drive better resource efficiency and risk management, and ultimately add value to how we're doing that, enhancing our biodiversity and working together. And you know, I put there, of course, embedding nutrition as a value of food and farming, because we don't have spare people, we don't have spare time, we don't have spare resources. So logical approaches such as integrated farm management and more circular agriculture are going to be key. Next, please. So, you know, I think what does the future look like? Well, it will be transformative, but it could be really good fun in that transformation, because there's some really exciting opportunities in innovation. And I think as an industry, you know, we are very collective, although everybody always says, oh, farming doesn't work together. We do. And, you know, we work on common problems, and really, you know, the scale and the speed is going to be key. And if you think you can, if you can think it, we can do it. So that's going to be very important. Next, please. So thank you very much indeed. And I think what's key is, if you want to go fast, fine, go alone. But actually, if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's where the most important piece is. Thank you, Mark.
Brilliant, Caroline. Thank you as ever. Very, very passionate in the belief around integrated farm management, I think, and really covering just a myriad of topics there. I think what it probably highlights, I think you said quite early on this evening about, I'll misquote you, I know for sure, but something about the more you learn about nature, the more you realise you don't know about nature. And I think that is so key in terms of how we look at our farming businesses and how we look at soil health and how we look at how we are producing our crops, is that this isn't a black and white area. It's not the right thing. I'll say it's not the right thing. Sorry, it's not a one size fits all approach, and you do have to look at quite a lot of detail within your own farming business. I think for me, and having got involved in the project over the last 12 months, the thing that was really interesting, or became really interesting, was of the 10 farms that participated, there was a very wide mix of farming businesses, from large estates to small mixed farms to lots of people in the middle, perhaps like ourselves, all at very different stages of this and all taking quite different approaches. I think the one thing that really struck me about it, and I think very much with my kind of tenants and business hat on it, is that there is an opportunity, I think, with a nature-based or a more nature-based approach to actually change the economics of your farming business, because we have been running for many years, and I don't think this has been the wrong way to do it, because it was the marketplace at the time, on requiring large bits of equipment, using a lot of diesel, doing it as fast as we can, and that was the way to go. And that actually prohibited the smaller arable and family farming business from really being in charge of their own destiny. I think when you look at nature-based solutions, actually nature in itself is not very costly. So because we already have it, it's already here. But what you do need to know is, where is your starting point? What are you trying to improve? And what you will find out, as I've found out in a very few months of sort of getting more engaged with this, is that what you find out is just a load of stuff that you don't know, and you don't quite know what to do about it. And you're going to try something and it might not work, but it does give you a bit greater control, I think, potentially over your farming system. And the other thing, which I guess we'll all end up having to look at, is the role of livestock. Heaven forbid we end up without any livestock, but the role of livestock in the whole agricultural system, because I think nature-based solutions actually benefit massively from having livestock on units, and that needs to be factored into how you look at things. But there's so many unknowns. But in lots of ways that makes it very, very exciting, as you said latterly. So I think probably this, when we're talking about unknowns and the time to do it and all this kind of thing, plays very well into our next and final speaker, Baroness Rock, who's going to talk a little bit about the Tenancy Working Group that she's been very instrumental in pulling together. The key role of that, I think, is to understand how how tenants remain fully engaged in the new ELM support system. And I think when you're talking about nature-based stuff and length of time to do stuff and see how things work, that is absolutely critical. And tenants have demonstrated over so many years how good they are at, being entrepreneurial, taking the right approach, that we need to be fully engaged in this. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Baroness Rock to talk a little bit about what she's doing with the group and how that might work. So thank you.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this evening. So thank you very much for the invitation. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the working group, which is a very new group. It was only launched and announced at the end of January, and we had our first meeting today. It is an independent group, and it is going to be an independent review reporting directly to the Secretary of State. And as Mark quite rightly said, it is going to be providing independent advice to DEFRA on ways to maximise participation in and benefits of the new government schemes, particularly focusing around AHA tenants and FBT tenants. And you'll see on the screen the objectives. But what I wanted to do is just maybe give a little bit of a broad overview. I see this as an opportunity to challenge current policy and scheme design, but in a very constructive way, which will lead to positive changes to the tenanted sector. And as Mark said, I am myself a tenant farmer and I am in Dorset, Mark. So thank you for that. There are two overriding objectives that are going to underpin this group. The first is to ensure success for the government's objective to transition from the old systems into the new framework, which, as we all know, is targeting public payments for public goods. But very importantly, underpinning farming productivity and resilience. And for that to be a success, the new schemes being developed and the various private initiatives that are springing up, and I'd be interested in some views on those, they do need to be able to attract and involve the tenanted sector of agriculture. The second objective is to ensure the continuance and resilience of the landlord-tenant system within agriculture. I think it's really vital that we retain a strong, healthy and robust tenanted sector into the future. The future of farming does depend on us tenants, as well as obviously the land and the landlord or the land occupiers. And I feel particularly strongly about this given the liquidity it brings to land for progressive farmers and also providing opportunities to new entrants. In respect of those two objectives, DEFRA have identified two problems that we're being asked to address. First, the potential for tenants to be excluded from accessing schemes, either due to the short length of term, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, on FBTs, but also due to restrictive terms within tenancy agreements. And although tenancies under AHA will have recourse to the dispute resolution facilities which went through under the Ag Act 2020, there are no provisions for FBTs. The government has said that it does not want to introduce new arrangements, but I think we will, as a group, need to be clear and robust in our recommendations. And obviously, it would be preferable if we were able to find ways in which we can avoid disputes at all. The second problem is the extent to which we are already seeing land being lost from the tenanted sector, with some landlords either already resuming land to take advantage of new schemes, or giving formal or informal notice to their tenants that such action may happen in the not too distant future. And obviously this will severely deplete the amount of land in the sector, and we need to find ways of addressing that. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So what is in the scope of the review? Well, our task is to start with the way in which schemes are designed to ensure fair access to tenants on the one hand and the security of tenure on the other. And this will form a large part of our work. However, DEFRA have also given us the remit to look at a wider regulatory or legislative changes that may be needed to be made. And we're not going to hold back from suggesting what we believe may be necessary to avoid these problems if we need to. Equally, we do have a remit to advise DEFRA on areas that need to be discussed with other government departments. And primarily, I actually see that possibly around taxation. And we will be having a very thorough and informed debate about the way in which we can engage with the Treasury. Ambition. I think I've set myself a very ambitious timeline on this because I would like to deliver a recommendation within 6 to 9 months. It's a bit daunting, but I believe it is achievable. And we're going to be slightly unusual in this, in that we're going to also be working alongside DEFRA, feeding in as we go along. So we're not going to do a review with a report at the end and then recommendations. We're going to have a slightly different approach, and we're going to be feeding in recommendations and working with DEFRA side by side as they start to develop some of the new schemes going forward. Next slide, please. So what will our process look like? Well, you know, that's really where I've highlighted that we do need to make sure that we're not out of date by the time that we publish. So we will be really working side by side with DEFRA, and I'm really pleased that DEFRA have been extremely supportive and encouraging of the working group. The Secretary of State has made it very clear to us that this is a very, very important area and we need to really focus on it. Next slide, please. But the most important thing, please, is we want to hear from you. We want to hear from tenants. We want to hear from landlords. We want to hear from advisors. We want to hear from agents. I've already had a really fantastic start to this, and I've had a lot of incoming ideas, thoughts, recommendations, and I've had a really great meetings with politicians, with ministers, with organisations. And I'm also delighted to say that George Dunn is a member of the working group, and therefore, please, if I could encourage everybody on this call or your wider network to feed any thoughts and ideas into the TFA on that email, because I do think that this is a very important piece of work, but we can only do it with the recommendations, thoughts, ideas, and energy from the tenanted agricultural sector, which is all of you. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope that I shall be hearing from lots of you in the future. Mark, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And that's a great little introduction to what the group is trying to do. And I know you know that we think it's a really important part of the process. And we do have a bit of an opportunity, and I certainly second the request there to get in touch with you or get in touch via us with you about any concerns. And there are a lot of concerns at the moment, but I think this working group does offer an opportunity and is a recognition, by DEFRA that there are potential issues with how tenants can access the new schemes. But on a positive note, it's also a recognition by DEFRA, I believe, that it's really important that tenants can access these new schemes. And I think, again, being positive about it, I think the new environment does actually offer a really good opportunity for those more progressive tenants and progressive landlords to really work closely together to make the most of the new environment and the new system that we're all going to be operating under. So, the best of luck really with that group, and good luck with the 6 months. You haven't got a very high bar to do better than DEFRA in hitting timescales, but that's quite ambitious. So good luck with that. 6 to 9, Mark, I'm going to say, just in case, give you a bit of leeway. But I do think that we have opened a door, and therefore I think speed is important in this. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And obviously DEFRA are up and running with moving along with these schemes now. So, there is some urgency with feeding into the system. So that's great. And I'm pleased to say that, as I mentioned earlier, on the 6th of April, we'll be running a webinar. Baroness Rock will be with us again, and we'll have a bit more detail about the group. I think you'll have sat a few times from then. I think you sat today, did you? Or yesterday? Today. We did. We had our first meeting this afternoon, which was extremely, really encouraging, and a lot of thought and ideas already coming through. Yeah. Okay, that's great. I'm conscious of time, and I think to some extent we are inevitably running over. Julia was very keen to point out earlier that it was my poor chairmanship that meant that we didn't get through the questions in the past, but I beg to differ on that, but we'll see how we go. So I'm going to get a few questions in. I'm always conscious that Zoom events like this have a certain limited time span in terms of concentration. So we'll try and stick to the 8 o'clock. We won't get through all the questions. We might run over a little bit. If that means your dinner's gone cold or whatever, please leave us and rewatch the last 5 or 10 minutes. But we might run over a little bit, but we'll try and stick to time as best we can. I think I'm going to pick up the first question here from a member in Hampshire, which is really, I guess, for you, Caroline, but ties in a little bit to the work that the working group might do. And he asks, how can tenant farmers, often on short-term tenancies, see the return on investment of using nature-based farming techniques? And are there any quick wins for those without long-term security? I think that is quite key, not only just from a nature-based perspective, but also from what we see with elms and having access to schemes. So maybe Baroness Rock could comment a little bit on that aspect of this as well. But Caroline, are there any quick wins we can all crack on with before Easter?
Well, before Easter, I mean, I think obviously, as you say, elms is a very key part of all of that. I think some of the additional quick wins are very much around that whole area of better attention to detail, utilizing nature, improving your farming systems. And that's, if it's a very short-term tenancy, then that's much harder. But I think the quick wins are understanding where you kind of might be able to benefit, certainly from the sustainable farming incentives.
Okay, thank you. Baroness Rock, perhaps I could just pull in another question on this relating, you touched on it in your presentation there about the taxation framework and how that might be used to encourage longer term lets, because clearly that's quite important both from a SFI elms perspective, but also from what Caroline's been talking about in terms of putting nature-based solutions into practice on farm to provide all the benefits that we hope will come. So perhaps you could just touch on that for us.
So thanks, Mark. So I think there are two things. I think we're definitely going to be looking at length of schemes, and particularly length of schemes around LNR and LR. So would be very grateful for any ideas around what you would consider to be sort of good length of schemes, because I think that's going to be an important area for tenant farmers. On the taxation, I just noticed in the Q&A there was also a question around stamp duty. I have made an absolute priority that we are going to be engaging with the Treasury on this, and that we are going to have discussions with the Treasury on how it can use fiscal policy to nudge the right approach. That obviously will require legislation. And that is something that I am keen to look at. So I don't want to promise any changes in taxation right here and now, but it is very much in our remit. And I would welcome any thoughts and ideas on that. And I know the TFA have got some very strong recommendations around taxation.
Yeah, I think, yeah, George is very good at explaining all of that better than me. But to me, it seems like the change in the schemes is a perfect opportunity to use legislation to encourage people to let for longer, because BPS obviously was a simple annual scheme. So, why have anything that's longer than a year almost? Yeah. Whereas with the new elm schemes, if you want people to participate, and the government do want people to participate, 70% plus they're expecting to go into SFI. So if they do, they need to make it possible for people to do that. And longer term tenancies is a method of doing that, really. I mean,
that's absolutely right, Mark. And I think the other thing to say is that, we all know that, a third of agricultural, land falls under tenant farmers. If we don't have tenant farmers participating in the schemes, they're just not going to work in the long term. And they won't fulfill the ambitions that the government have set for these schemes. So it's absolutely key that we're, that the tenanted sector are involved and engaged with the schemes, but they've got to be right for tenant farmers, and that includes looking at incentives and length of scheme. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Just moving on, and I'm pleased to say we've got a question from one of our Welsh members. I'm always a bit conscious with these webinars that we do around new elm schemes that obviously Wales is on a different track to us, and we don't want to kind of exclude them. But I think this is pretty relevant both to what's happening in Wales and over here, and perhaps there's one a little bit for you, Caroline, and I might just tag onto this, but. He asked, with farm tenants required to pay rent, which assumes that they are farming a system of agriculture suitable for the holding, how do we get around the need for tenants having to ensure that each acre is economically productive as possible? And perhaps I could just tag onto that as whether we think that DEFRA is getting the payment rates for the various standards that are coming through, whether they're getting those right, in order to encourage people and to allow people to get the most economic productivity out of those areas, as well as doing the environmental things.
Yes, I mean, a nice little sting in the tail there of that final question. I think the payment rates, yes, there's quite a lot of negotiation and discussion going on at the moment about that split of third, with a substantial amount of money going into the landscape recovery approaches, which will not really go to the number of farmers that we would all like to see. But I think in answer to the Welsh question, and indeed a little bit, there's a question from somebody from Devon as well. It's about I would say integrated farm management, but it is ensuring that you are doing the best for your land. And one of the real dangers is, at the end of the day, wonderful as DEFRA it may be or not be, depending on your opinion, or in Wales, obviously slightly different mechanisms, but they're not your farm, they're not the farmers, and you are the farmers, and you've got to make that land work as effectively and as efficiently as possible. So some of the management tools that we've got with Leaf Mark are obviously things like the Leaf Sustainable Farming Review, and that's been very much geared towards around trying to balance what are the right priorities for your business. Because if there is a piece of land that you can really benefit from getting additional payments from government, then, that's the choice you should be taking. If, however, it is a piece of, it's an area that, through soil improvement, and you can get, sustainable farming initiative support through that, then that's the piece that you really should be driving the productivity. So it's all a question of really getting the balance right. And I so one thing I forgot to say at that previous question you had, where some of our tenants really benefit is that they are able to demonstrate to their landlords, we're doing the right thing, because the landlords obviously want to see their land managed effectively, and you can often, be the priority tenant choice because you have demonstrated that you are around, good attention to detail and things like that. So I think, it's about doing the best thing and the best thing that's right. And don't be driven by what government wants. Use it as a supplementary support to really drive your efficiency within the farm business.
Yeah, I think that latter bit, Caroline, is really, really good advice. And I think you also touch on there the sort of tenant-landlord relationship, which I do believe is so critical now, perhaps more so than ever before, in terms of the landlords understanding what the new system is requiring and what the benefits are and why they're requiring this thing, and working hand in hand with tenants. Not, as I think perhaps we've got a little bit too comfortable, we've not got comfortable with it, but the industry perhaps has got a bit comfortable with BPS setting the starting point for a rent negotiation and the agent seeing how much more money they can get out of the holding regardless of what it's doing. I think it's so important now for landlords and tenants to work together collaboratively to produce what we are effectively being asked to produce, which is some contribution towards reducing the devastating effects of climate change. So I think we've got to work collaboratively together on that, and landlords have to understand that. And that may mean that the rental income is a little bit lower, but that may be the right thing to do. So I think we've got to all look at how that all fits together. As I say, I'm really conscious of time. We've overrun already, but I'm going to ask one final question, just slightly not entirely nature-based, but it certainly touches on the Leaf Mark standards, Caroline. Member in Lincolnshire asks, how do we build in earn recognition from participation in schemes like Leaf Mark into the regulatory and policy environment operated by DEFRA and its agencies? And I'll tag on a question that we've had in the Q&A from Peter Howlett about the role of Leaf being able to undertake farm assurance in a better and more sustainable way than perhaps the likes of Red Tractor. And is there any likelihood of that happening and actually reducing the number of inspections that we all seem to have to undertake now and have one more common standard?
So in answer to the sort of the first question about earned recognition, I think it's a very powerful tool. It's a very powerful opportunity, because in the scheme of, oh my goodness, we've got to make change, and it's 8 years really in terms of trying to deliver against the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Accord, etc. So earned recognition is a very powerful tool for supporting change, and we've had 2 tests and trials in this particular area, and we're in quite a lot of discussion at the moment within government to really try and drive that. So one, if there's anything you can do as individuals and say, look, it works for us, it makes sense, please do that. But we will sort of do our part in the discussions that we have with DEFRA, which are really constructive, and occasionally they sort of say, oh, do we need to do this? And we go, yeah, you do, it's good. And the Environment Agency, yes, you do, it's good. So that's encouraging. With regards to leaf taking over the world, obviously, it will always be our inherent goal. No, I think leaf builds on red tractor. We don't duplicate within the leaf mark standard the requirements of red tractor, which are obviously core food safety requirements, and we work with Global Gap on a global basis. One of the sort of 3 areas, because sorry, it's not a straightforward question at all, but we already do joint inspections. So if you're having your red tractor, then yes, you could certainly do leaf mark at the same time, and that's something that's really important. I think what COVID has taught us is that we can do hybrid approaches to inspection, which saves time. There are inspections for different areas. There's some for which you get paid lots of money from DEFRA or government, some people do. There are others, such as farm assurance schemes, which are critical for your market. And there are only 5 independently externally verified assurance schemes. So you're talking red tractor as a core food safety standard, 2 organics Farmers and Growers and Soil Association, RSPCA assured, and leaf mark certification for environmental sustainability. So there isn't a lot when you ultimately think this is the market opportunity. What leaf mark on a label in Tesco is going to be able to demonstrate is actually to the consumer, this is kind of sustainability here for you. You're making it easier. It's recognition to the farmer. It's, yes, credibility to Tesco or Lidl or Marks and Spencers and Waitrose, all who are leaf mark certified in their fresh produce sector. And we often forget, how much money do we put into marketing? Adverts, my personal opinion, don't work. I think we all watch television less and less. But in terms of the real opportunity of connecting with people when they make purchasing decisions, when they go out onto farm, when they're in the countryside, or indeed when they're at school, like through educational approaches and things like that, is increasingly important. And, as a farming industry, we've got a fabulous story to tell. And, we need to really build on the things that we're very good at and recognize the things that we've got challenges with and actually find solutions for them. So, if it's happening, and I can remember this when we first started with Open Farm Sunday, a few farmers said, oh, we're going to hide the sprayer. Well, why are you hiding the sprayer? Are you ashamed of it? Is it broken? Is it illegal? And I said, oh no, people don't want to talk about this. Yes, they do. And if it's illegal, sort it out, but actually don't hide a story, which is a really important bit of how we manage our crops. Because yes, we take medicines when we're not well. Likewise, it's really important for crops to be looked after as well. And there will be, we'll see more integrated pest management solutions with more biological controls, which will come with different challenges. But at the end of the day, we need to be open and honest and use the advantage. So yes, we will continue to drive efficiency in how the certification activity, i.e. the auditor going out onto your farm, is sort of managing, but and how we bring together data. And I think the next 5 years will probably see that. And when we always get our inspection for Red Tractor at home just before Christmas, and I think it's Christmas. I think Phil does it on purpose because I think he doesn't want to go Christmas shopping or something.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Caroline. I think you really hit a nail on the head there. I think we do have a very good story to tell, and I don't think we should be ashamed of it. And I think to some degree, we shouldn't necessarily be too nervous of inspections and audits and whatever, because if we are doing the right thing, then actually there's nothing to worry about too much. So, but I think getting that message across to the general public as to how we look after and produce their food is really, really critical. Okay, well, I'm going to draw things to a close because, and I know I'm very aware, as always, we haven't got round to all the questions. All of the speakers have agreed that they will come back to us on some of the questions that haven't been answered, and we will circulate those. So just a couple of reminders quickly. The next one of these webinars is on Wednesday, the 23rd of March, and covers the lump sum exit scheme. So which will no doubt be another interesting topic for discussion. So don't miss that. Usual format, starts at 7. Hopefully doesn't finish at 8:10, but aims to finish at 8. So a big thank you really to Caroline, to Baroness Rock, and as always to Linda for your contributions this evening. All really valuable. Lots of food for thought on all of those issues, I think. Thank you all very much for attending and taking the time and coming to listen to everybody. Hopefully you've learned something tonight, or certainly given you some ideas as to what you might want to do. And I hope that you can all wake up in the morning and the wind's gone down. I was struggling to hear Caroline's last answer as the rain was thrashing against the window here. So I'm slightly hoping that that's going to disappear. So anyway, a big thank you once again to everybody that's attended. A big thank you to all of the speakers. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again on the 23rd of March.